In this STEM video, we will be focusing on the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn stress and trauma response. We will also discuss the differences between dog and human responses. First of all, what is the fight, flight, freeze, fawn response? Well, it's the automatic response to something that threatens your safety and well-being. This develops in early humans because in the wild you always have to be more prepared for physical threats. Today we might face more psychological threats, which is why you might overreact to smaller things, like a deadline or someone being rude. The fight response is trying to ward the threat off, especially physically or by showing strength. The flight response is trying to escape the threat. The freeze response describes stopping or freezing in fear. This could mean either playing dead or being physically immobile because of your fear. The fawn response describes trying to please the threat. This could mean bargaining for your safety or being extra kind to the threat. Now we will explore the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn physical process in human brains. There are 4 major parts of the physical process: sensing the threat, brain processing, the messages to the body, and the response. First is sensing the threat. This just means sensing a threat in any way. It can be anything that scares you, from a car coming straight towards you to just watching a horror movie. Once you sense a threat, that feeling of sensing a threat is converted to electrical signals that travel through tiny nerve cells, like the one shown on the upper right, to the brain. The thalamus in the brain decides whether to ignore the threat or not, and if it isn't ignored, then a message is sent to the amygdala, which is basically where your emotions are processed. The amygdala then signals the hypothalamus, which releases the hormone CRF to the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland then releases the hormone ACTH into the bloodstream to tell the adrenal cortex to release the hormone cortisol. Meanwhile, the brain is also sending a signal down the nervous system to the adrenal medulla to start releasing the hormone adrenaline, which goes to the liver to tell it to start converting glycogen to glucose, which is the body's main source of energy. That glucose goes to our muscles through the bloodstream, so more energy is directed to the muscles. It also helps our heart beat faster to get more of that glucose and oxygen to our muscles. The adrenaline also speeds up your breath rate so you can get more oxygen into your body and more carbon dioxide out of your body. Blood vessels, which are like pipes that carry blood, that lead to muscles, widen so more blood can get to them. And blood vessels that lead to the digestive system narrow so digestion slows down so we can focus all our energy on facing a threat. Once your body is prepared, you will be ready to respond by fighting, fleeing, freezing, or fawning. You won't even need to think about your response. It just happens. For example, if a friend were to come up behind you and yell, "Boo!" you don't listen to their voice and make an inference on who it might be. You just act in case you were in a deadly situation.
A psychopath is a person incapable of feeling empathy. This affects the brain in many different ways. This occurs when the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex do not communicate as they should. Because the amygdala mainly processes fear, this affects the fight or flight response in people with this condition. This tends to weaken the fight or flight response, which tends to make it seem like this kind of person has a weaker sense of fear. However, excluding people who are psychopaths, humans have much stronger emotions, making it easier for them to use traits like empathy and guilt, which is why most humans can have mixed emotions, while animals cannot. However, dogs have the closest emotional intelligence to humans out of all of the other animals.
Now we can look at how fight, flight, freeze, and fawn look in dogs. For the most part, this is very similar to how it looks in humans, but there are some differences that separate the two.
The fight response in dogs is fairly similar to humans. They both describe when a species tries to use aggression to scare a threat off. With dogs, this happens when a stress hormone is released that prepares them to fight. This can also cause heart rate to increase, as well as blood pressure. Next is the flight response. The flight response in dogs looks almost identical to humans. However, dogs have a quicker reaction time, making this a more applicable response. Next is the freeze response. The freeze response in dogs tends to look a little bit different than in humans. Because while humans will usually just stay in place, a dog might try to play dead. This response was very critical in the wild, which is why dogs will tend to play dead. Finally, we have fawn. While the fawn response in humans tends to look like convincing a threat, dogs will use physical responses, like tail tucking or using what people would call puppy dog eyes. It makes sense that these would vary between species, but why does it vary within species? As it turns out, this has more to do with the situation than the animal or person. For example, if someone or something thinks they can control a situation, they usually choose fight. If not, they're more likely to choose one of the other three. This is because fighting something is more dangerous than fleeing from it. In conclusion, dogs and humans have similar responses because they both come from the same place, the wild. However, both species have become domesticated over time, so we will have similar psychological threats to face. However, while the two species do have their similarities, there are definitely some differences. This is because dogs are much closer with their wild ancestors, which is why you will usually see very fast reaction times in dogs while slower ones in humans.